Good afternoon and welcome. My name is David Wortley. I'm the Virtual Conferences Director at IORMA. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Allyson Stewart-Allen, who is going to be looking after you for this session. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A area rather than the text chat. So now, without further ado, I'm going to ask Allyson to introduce herself and start this session off. Allyson.
Great. So welcome, everyone. Delighted to have you here on this transatlantic themed conversation. As your chair of this webinar, I'm Allyson Stewart-Allen. I'm the CEO of International Marketing Partners. And I've set this company up several years ago now to help UK organizations succeed in the US and US companies succeed in the UK and beyond. I'm the author of a best-selling book called Working with Americans. And over the last 30 years, I've helped over 260 businesses across 27 countries to succeed in growing internationally. I'm also the creator of a LinkedIn learning program called Leading International Growth. Please have a look for that. And feel free to see some top tips there on succeeding in other parts of the world. Besides the consulting work, I also do a lot of executive education. I create leadership programs for Said Business School at Oxford University. I also do teaching there, used to do this at London Business School, and spend a lot of time also on Sky News and other outlets talking quite extensively about international business stories, especially US to UK and vice versa. I'm delighted to be joined by an expert set of panelists, including Miya Knights. She is the owner and publisher of Retail Technology Magazine and is also a member of the IORMA Advisory Board alongside me and others you'll see today. She's got over 25 years of experience as a retail technology analyst, an editor, she's an author, and she's a consultant. She's also co-authored 2 best-selling books about Amazon and omni-channel retail. Miya serves also as a consultant and an advisor to several technology companies. She judges numerous industry awards. She's also a member of the Retail Influencer Network, Customer Strategy Network, and the KPMG Retail Think Tank. She regularly appears as a retail technology expert for news and current affairs TV programs, frequently quoted in the press, moderates at industry events, and was recognized in 2021 as an Arts and Media Senior Leader by the Black British Business Awards. You're in very good hands with Miya here today as well. Joining us with Miya is Brian Kilcourse, Managing Partner at RSR Research, also an advisory board member for IORMA. He's recognized as a thought leader in retail technology, the co-founder and managing partner of Retail Systems Research since 2007. And really his company focuses on delivering research strategies and knowledge for the extended retail industry. He's advised a number of well-known companies, including Cisco, SAP, IBM, Toshiba, SAS, and numerous others. He's authored several research reports on omni-channel retailing, supply chain, customer data security, business intelligence and analytics, amongst many other themes. He's a frequent presenter at corporate events. And additionally, with RSR, Brian advises retail client companies on their IT and business alignment strategies. Alongside Brian, we have Steve Rowen, also RSR Research as its managing partner, also an advisory board member of IORMA. He is working as an industry market intelligence expert, advising retailers to make even more strategic decisions about the role of IT in their enterprises. Steve focuses on areas of emerging impact on retail, widely regarded as one of the most informed and objective voices in the industry today. He began his career in retail, in fact, entering the tech space as a project manager at a New York City software developer during the dot-com boom. And after a number of years as a retail journalist, made the transition to being a retail industry analyst in 2006. And joining Steve, we're delighted to have John Scott, leader of Liminal Retail, also an advisory board member of IORMA. John set this independent consumer consultancy practice up in response to the current unique global and industry conditions, with a recognition that flexible and agile approaches are required to move retail forward. John's an accomplished international retail senior exec. He's been responsible for leading the entry, the development, and the operations of owned, franchise, and wholesale businesses in over 35 competitive markets around the world. Initially establishing himself in UK retail with merchandising, John's first foray into international was working for MH Al Shaya, the largest global retail franchise operator in the Middle East. During the time there, John also built up a significant and unique network of contacts in retail, franchise, digital, and real estate communities in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. His specialism is developing and implementing international strategic direction for retail businesses, and also takes an active interest in the development of the wider industry, both moderating and speaking at global conferences and events. So given this fantastic panel, we're hoping that you're going to flood our chat with your Q&A questions that we will take near the end of our session. But before I put some questions to the panel, I just would like to briefly talk about the differences between, as I see them anyway, between UK and US consumers, because the cultural differences have profound implications for anyone in a retail business. So one of the things that you may be aware of is Topshop's US foray. So Topshop initially set up independent stores well over a decade ago in the United States, and now are actually concessions within Nordstrom stores in America. But when they established their own stores, one of the challenges they had was the size of the dressing rooms. And you might think, what a trivial point, who cares about something like that? However, American consumers and shoppers care about something like that. And unfortunately for Topshop, they took the template that was successful in the UK of the size of the average changing room and just assumed that would work well in America. But because of the size and expectations we have around space, personal space, store sizes, distances between fittings and fixtures, Americans generally found the square footage for the changing rooms way too small. And again, while a UK consumer might think that's absolutely fine, the US consumer was not happy. So this was a very important learning for the likes of Topshop and other fashion retailers who take a template that works in one part of the world and assumes it will work everywhere else. Same is true for the very famous case that certainly people in the UK are very aware of, which is Tesco and its Fresh and Easy format, again, in the US. This was not successful, despite throwing lots of money at it. Tesco commissioned lots of research in Southern California, where I'm from. I'm from Los Angeles, and in an eastern suburb of LA, Tesco recreated a full-size store inside a soundstage that they had purpose-built. And they tested every aspect of the store format, the size of the shopping carts, the merchandise and the ambient and fresh and frozen foods in the store. And the tests were all very informative. Went back to headquarters here in the UK, saying if we're going to launch in the US, these are some critical success factors for us, including the width of the car parking spaces, including how we package fresh produce, including how we merchandise in store. And so Tesco said, yes, thank you for commissioning the research. That's all really interesting. And then the real store started to launch, starting in California. So their first store was in a obscure location by California standards called Hemet, which is in the mountains around Southern California. It's really very near a big ski resort. And I guess this was a way to try to test things without getting into too much trouble. So after the Hemet store, then more stores proliferated in Southern California. And long story short, Fresh and Easy no longer exists. And you might say, well, how is it that this brand could, spend millions of dollars, pounds, euros, whatever currency you like, to try to be successful in the US, given it had international retail expertise at the heart of the Tesco business? But unfortunately, it assumed what works at home works everywhere. And despite the market research they did suggesting they needed to make some fundamental changes, such as do not pre-pack the oranges and apples and onions and all the other produce. Americans choose each item on their own. They did pre-packing. They did self-checkout, which at the time was a novelty when Americans were used to having someone at the end of the conveyor belt to pack your things. You did your own scanning and packing. So these are only a couple of the offenses. I think the worst was probably the in-store experience with the buzzing fluorescent lights and the cutaway boxes that Aldi and Lidl today are so famous for. However, at that time, Americans who were on a tight budget didn't want reminding that they're on a tight budget. Americans are aspirational and need an in-store environment that's going to make them feel aspirational. So on so many counts, Tesco Fresh and Easy was never going to last. There's a lot of great lessons there for every retailer about what localizations are going to be required. And I think that sets us up nicely for a conversation now with my fellow panelists about transatlantic US versus UK retail preferences, differences, industry structure, intensity of competition, and all these rich topics that we look forward now to covering. So to kick off, I'm going to put a question first to Miya, if I may. And first question, I guess, for you, Miya, is what you think are the most important lessons for UK and US retailers in terms of how they might learn from each other.
Well, thank you, Allyson. Yes, I was laughing heartily, not just smiling ruefully through your Tesco story, because the book I wrote on omnichannel retail was actually co-written with Tim Mason, the CEO of Fresh and Easy at the time. So I had a bit of an insider view what he felt went wrong there, and I think you called out a number of examples of what went wrong, but also summed it up in terms of localization, and I think further beyond that, it's listening to your customer and serving the customer that as you find them in the region that you serve them. In that regards, to answer your question, in terms of the lessons that US and UK retailers can learn from each other. I was thinking about this one, obviously from my accent. I'm on the side of the pond representing the UK, and I really think coming to me first as well, it's useful to set up a few sort of statistical facts so we can understand the context within which I'm answering the question. So UK market's about $500 billion, obviously vastly smaller in size than the US, which is not only geographically larger, but has about a $7.3 trillion retail industry. And I think in that regards, the personalities, you talked about pack sizes, you talked about the amount of size we have, space we have to store things, for example. In terms of personalities, I think UK retailers really need to learn from Americans with the size and the scale that they have to manage, how to track and react to changes really, really quickly. At the same time, I think US retailers can learn how to appeal to the broadest church not just chase trends, but understand which ones are going to stick by looking at the slightly more mature omni-channel audience that is the UK. So that's kind of, we're going sort of top down. We can go into the detail about why that is, but I tried to sort of bring it down to just differences in personality traits as a result of the differences in the environment in which we live on either side of the pond.
Great. Thank you so much, Miya. So let me put a question again on the same transatlantic retail theme now. If I may, Brian, ask for your view on what you see are the key changes taking place in the supply chains, either side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, the supply chain is, of course, a huge deal, and we all got sent to school during the pandemic, right? The supply chains fundamentally broke. The big difference between the UK and the American supply chain is really defined by two things. It's defined, first of all, where we get our products from in the United States, and secondarily, the sheer size of the continent. So the first thing to understand is that the vast majority of the products that we sell come from Asia Pac. So they have to come across the water, and they arrive on the West Coast. And then from the West Coast, they make their way across America to ultimately to the stores. So something in the area of greater than 75% of our supply chain costs are actually over the land. It's not over the water. That's problem number one. Problem number two has to do with the changing behaviors of consumers. Most of our supply chains, and I spent most of my life designing and implementing supply chain systems. They were designed with one thing in mind, basically to lower the unit cost of goods by buying a highly standardized assortment and delivering it uniformly across the entire market. Consumers clearly revolted against that, and the revolt really hit hard with the introduction of the iPhone. But then it was reinforced, of course, right before COVID with the rise of omni-channel. So the assumption of the supply chain was that products came from fixed locations, delivered in a highly uniform way to the stores. And really, it wasn't about what consumers wanted to buy, but it was about what retailers wanted to sell. And it worked really well. It's the mass merchandising market, the mass merchandising model, and it guaranteed a certain profitability. Consumers broke through that entirely because they have the choice of everything in the world at their fingertips all the time. So now, instead of a very serial supply chain, supply chains are transforming into supply networks. And that has an interesting impact on how you design the systems that support them and how you deliver a product to market. Part of the thing, and Miya, you mentioned this a little bit ago about localization. Americans not great at localization. That might be an understatement. They're learning they need to localize, and they need to be able to do a couple of things that they didn't worry too much about before. They needed to make sure that they delivered very high service levels to customers, and they needed to lower their overall investment in paid for inventory. These are two magical things that if you thought about the way we built supply chains in the past, we didn't really concern ourselves with. As a matter of fact, to deliver high service levels to customers when I was an executive, we just basically flooded the zone with inventory. You can't do that any longer. But the worst sin is disappointing your consumer, who now has that window into the entire world, and they take advantage of it. So localization is a huge thing. And that is enabled by a couple of new technologies. The first is what I'd characterize as digital twin, kind of broadly. It's the ability to see inventory with a high degree of precision and accuracy in near real time, wherever it is. Now, the number one reason you want that is you want to be able to have an available to sell position, which is really reliable for the consumer. But the number two reason you would do that is you want to be able to identify supply chain bottlenecks and disruptions, and ultimately to optimize the flow of goods to market. So these are big, big changes happening in the supply chain. Depending on how many cups of coffee I've had in the morning, I might say it's a major, major fix to our supply chains that my generation of technologists implemented. On a darker day, I might say you need to rip and replace everything. And that's a tall statement.
Thank you very much, Brian. Lots of great food for thought there. So, Steve, let me come to you now, if I may, and ask your view on the future of the retail workforce, because for many, on this call today and in the sector, the workforce, attracting and retaining staff is one of their biggest headaches.
It most certainly is, and I'm actually interested in part of the U.S. versus U.K. version of this. I can present to you, Brian and I. What we do is we survey U.S.-based retailers to find out where their sticking points are, and at the same point, we turn around and ask U.S. shoppers, "What do you think about these particular issues?" And as you might imagine, on this one particular issue, there's quite a bit of a chasm between what retailers report as their version of the truth and what consumers are saying they experience when they actually go into, when they leave their couch, when they get off Amazon and they physically go into a store, what they experience when they're there. We have a very significant problem in this country right now with historically low unemployment. We actually went out and asked retailers, what do you think about the current generation of employees that you have to pull from? 88% told us the number one challenge they have is that boomer generation employees have chosen retirement over work. These are people that are never coming back to the workforce. 85% said younger employees have better opportunities elsewhere. And then 78% said it's hard for young people to imagine a career in retail. This is I don't want to say insurmountable, but it is a challenge that retailers have not faced in a very long time in this country. Because for a lot of years, you probably go to your fair share of technology sponsored events. Retailers are more than happy to stand up on a stage and say the number one priority in our country is our company is our employees, and they're the lifeblood of this company. And then they've been very happy to underpay these people, undertrain these people, and treat them like a disposable resource. They simply can't do that anymore because young folks just aren't that attracted to a career in retail. The good news is retailers understand it. The problem is then the second part of it. What do you plan to do about this? And that retention, a lot of it is going to be rooted in the technology that US retailers are entertaining giving to their employees. Are we going to give them consumer grade technologies that they already know how to use? There's not going to be a steep learning curve for them to try to fold into so that they're able to offer value to the consumer, because the consumer is already walking in armed with the exact same technology. One of the things that retailers continually tell us year over year, every time we conduct a workforce survey, what is the most important thing that your workforce does? Well, it's to help customers answer questions that they cannot answer for themselves. In the modern reality, there's not much you can't solve for yourself with your own personal mobile device. The question is, will you seek out an employee before you do that? So US retailers are really at a crossroads. They're in this sort of, bringing a knife to a gunfight model, where they're constantly trying to solve for a problem they can't really solve for if they don't pour more investment into the stores. And the bigger part of it is, what does that investment look like? Unfortunately, the technologies that retailers tell us they value the most are not the ones they've invested in most heavily. They tell us they know they need to put more time into training employees, because if you can train an employee, you can give them some sense of community, you can make them feel valued, you can then turn them into a person. We're not going after brand ambassador at this point in this country. We're just going for relevant. Relevant would be good enough at this point. But you can turn that into someone who wants to stay with your brand and offer a valuable experience to consumers. It becomes this virtual cycle. The problem is, the only real area in workforce management and workforce technologies where we've seen a lot of investment so far in this country is in the basics. Things like work, scheduling, task force management, the ability for employees to shift their own schedules within. They're not investing in the kind of things that would actually help make it a more relevant experience, both for the consumer to come into store and for employees to be valuable once they're there. So we've got our work cut out for us in this country. We really do. And part of what we do at the end of all our reports is we offer what we call baseline recommendations. And these are not theoretical best practices to go chasing after for the next 5 to 10 years, but they're really based on what we've seen year over year, that particular year's data informing our opinions. They're really baseline suggestions for all retailers. And one of the things in this year's report that we drew really heavily upon was, if you're going to offer a more relevant experience to consumers, if you agree that the way to do that is by offering a more relevant workforce, then you need to understand what your workforce is doing in stores. And that means some form of consumer grade technology in the hand of consumer, or in the hands of associates, so that not only can they be more valuable to the person walking in off the street, but you can know what they're doing once they're in that store. Because the video solutions that in this country were sort of piggyback, they started as loss prevention, put a camera everywhere and you'll be able to stop loss in your store. And oh yeah, you could also learn more about how merchandise flows through the store and learn more about how employees flow. That's just too labor intensive, even with AI on the cusp. And I know John's here, and I'm sure he's chomping at the bit to talking about how AI could make sense of more of that video produced content. But the truth of the matter is, it's going to take investment in technology that does both of those things. It makes employees smarter, and it lets you know what they're actually doing when they're in the stores. So
Great.
I have to assume that's a similar experience across the pond, but I'm always open to the,
Excellent. Steve, thank you for that.
Sure.
So John, let me finally come to you and ask about how you see the transformation from third space shopping centers to third space social centers being dealt with by retailers and brands alike.
Sure.
I guess in terms of the purpose of the store size, the tech that's deployed, the P&L implications.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Allyson. Yeah. So a bit more about my background. I suppose I was 13 years at Debenhams as their global development director. So my background was very much in department stores for many years. And what you've seen, now is an acceleration due to COVID of what we were seeing before the pandemic in terms of both the US and UK. Where the anchor space, the department store, became increasingly less relevant. So it's raised loads of questions about what happens with the anchor space, and the reason why there was a big then question during the pandemic where online sales accelerated. The questions being asked were: is that the end of the mall? Will people just continue to buy online? And although it accelerated in the UK, probably only just behind, I think only behind China in terms of adoption of online. It's been really interesting to see what's happened with the retail physical space. Physical space. Unlike the US, where there were huge amounts of zombie malls, although malls that are half unoccupied in terms of the UK, there's been very few that have completely closed. I think there's a question of geography here, where they are, because we're such a populous country. A lot of the malls have kind of pivoted, and what you're seeing is where they were always the third space where people, when not at home, they're not at work, they'd be shopping in the malls. They're still going to the malls, but what you're now seeing is a change in purpose of those shopping centres. So, for example, F&B, huge growth in sort of eating out, huge growth in leisure. To the extent where Westfield, Stratford, for example, is the first mall in the UK to sell more in food and beverage than they do in fashion. And also what you're really seeing is people having increased dwell times in shopping malls, but actually footfall into stores is dropping. So that's clearly having an impact both on the malls themselves and on the retailers that are spending time in there. But what you've also seen at the same time is online sales, although have not gone back to pre-pandemic stage, they've sort of dropped to roughly in the UK around about 18, 19, 20% of overall sales. But what you're increasingly seeing is the role of the store becoming integral to those sales. So if you use an example of Next, for example, 60% of Next orders are picked up in store, and 80% of their product returns are being returned to the store. So although you've got a situation where not all of their stores are profitable, they remain open because of the impact it has on the online sales. Because where there's no store in a town, sales can drop 10, 15, 20%. Because there is not that opportunity to pick up and drop off. So you're seeing the role of the store going from very much just selling stuff to people to becoming a third of that, 40% of that is selling direct to consumer. The rest is then going to a service model of pick up and drop off, and then the other is just creating eyeballs so that even. It's even to the extent where certainly in central London where rents are high, retailers are treating their occupancy costs as a marketing cost because it is driving so much online penetration. Now, I can't speak for that in the US, but I do know that there isn't that same level of interaction between stores and stores and retail. And then interestingly, obviously, the other thing we're seeing a lot of here, and you're starting to see it more in the States, is where brands are moving to aggregators and marketplaces. So using Next again as the example in the UK, they've spent a huge amount of investment in working with other brands so that their stores can also be used for their online sales of other brands that they work with. In terms of both, so they've now probably got, I think it's something like 500 brands on their marketplace, on their site, and brands go to them next to all of the logistics, marketing to their own consumers, and pick up and return for other brands, and also using their stores to do the same thing. So there's definitely that feeling of creating that ecosystem where the use of their stores and online are benefiting the smaller brands that then operate with them.
Thank you. So Miya, I see your hand up. Please tell us what you're thinking.
Oh, I just wanted to pick up on John's brilliant response there, really, just from a point of information perspective, really, because I've always said that the UK consumers are the most voracious omni-channel shoppers in the world. Totally agree with John that we're sort of probably second only in appetite of shopping online to maybe China. But I did just double check it, and we are running at about 30.4% of total retail sales going online in the UK. Okay. And it's running at about between 18 and 20% in the US. I defer to my better half friends in Brian and Brian and Steve there on the other side of the pond. But I think that only just doubles down when you think about a third of retail sales going online in the UK. That really doubles down on the points that John was making about retailers really starting to understand the symbiotic relationship that exists between stores and online, how you can increase catchment area, you can increase footfall and conversion rates within a catchment area around a store online, and vice versa. When you close a store, you will see in the UK, you will see retailers reporting that their online conversion rates in that area by postcode drop as well. So that mix is becoming even more omni from a retailer's perspective, not just from consumers' perspective who don't see channels at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just a point of clarification. Yes, you're absolutely right, Marcel. I should have said I was referring to fashion when I said the 19 to 20%. Of course, if you throw grocery and hard goods in, that's much higher.
Exactly. I think picking up on Brian's point about difficulties with the supply chain and that becoming a supply network now, you are really seeing in terms of categories like fashion, high touch, high value items where people like to touch and feel the goods. Online penetration isn't going to be as high. I think in grocery, certainly in the UK, it was being throttled for a long time just because of the cost of that last mile, and getting all sorts of goods, just not just ambient goods, but perishable goods, temperature control goods to your door, exponentially raises the cost of serving the customer. So there are differences by category as well, but geographic density, number of credit cards, used to paying for stuff online without waiting for an invoice, for example. Those are all reasons why we've become such voracious online shoppers in the UK. And I think in that regard, there's certain things the US retailers need to bear in mind when they're comparing themselves, but there's also to UK retailers, but there's also certainly things they can learn from that.
Yeah.
Let me join in for just a moment on that. You're exactly right. By the way, store sales still represent about 83% of total sales in the United States. So it's around 17%. It got up to about 21, 22%, went to the online space during COVID, and it slid back down. But one of the things that's deceiving about statistics like that is it doesn't tell you how many of the journeys started in the digital space. The closest number we have is something from Google, which claims that something like 63 or 64% of all shopping journeys begin in the digital space. So in that context, the store has really become nodal to a selling environment. It's not an island of retail any longer. Now, the problem for American retailers is that their store chains are built with just that assumption in mind, that they're an island of retail. And we used to joke in my company that if the central office fell into a hole in the ocean, we're in California, so that was always a possibility, that it would be 3 days before any store would ever notice because they've run just fine. Nowadays, that's not possible at all. So it's a very different environment than it was even 10 years ago.
So let me take a look at some of these great questions that we've had coming in. First question is from Miles Thomas. So his question is Lidl making the same mistakes as Tesco Fresh and Easy? So I certainly have a view, but I'm sure others of you do as well. Would anyone like to put forward a view on that question?
I just can't believe we're talking so much about Fresh and Easy. I remember, what was it, 10, 15 years ago, I was living in Woodland Hills and I went all the way across the hill to go over to Hollywood to go to Fresh and Easy, and I was the only person in the store. And it didn't take, it's rush hour on a Friday and there's nobody in there and there's individually packed oranges. It's pretty easy to figure out what's going to happen here. I'll defer to you, Allyson, if you have strong feelings on Lidl. They're nowhere near where Brian and I are located. They're based in the Mid-Atlantic. They opened a slew of stores probably a couple years before the pandemic, and I know that they've been closing them pretty systemically ever since. German brand. The idea, correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea there was deeply discounted grocery. And to your point, that doesn't ring true with the American consumer. No matter how impoverished an American consumer is, they still think they're going to hit the lottery. They're going to get some of that billionaire money, and all of a sudden they're going to. So talking, I don't want to say talking down to, but appealing to one's sense of status in this country as being anything less than perfect doesn't seem to play well.
Yeah,
but it sounds like you have a strong opinion.
No, I would agree, and I'm thinking about American retailers like Trader Joe's. So for those of you on the call who know this grocer, they are pan-US. Their headquarters is California, and their prices generally are very competitive. But it feels more aspirational even for those on a budget, a tight budget, I should say. And so the likes of the Lidls and the Fresh and Easies do need to understand the mentality of the American grocery shopper, which is, I don't want you to tell me that I don't have any money. Right. By the way, you have the store fixtures and fittings and the layout. And so I think that's why people like, Trader Joe's, for example, have done really well. It's why Walmart has done really well. They've taken the stigma out of being on a tight budget and making it okay. Target has done a fantastic job in the US of doing that by doing collaborations, believe it or not, with designers. Sure. Whether it's a toaster or a kettle or fashion, you can still be on a tight budget, but we don't need to, make it an experience that is transactional and utilitarian, I think, is how I'd see that one. So
yeah, you're right. And this kind of gets back to something that John said about the third space. We wrote about this pretty recently, and it's important to keep in mind why consumers shop. And Americans do this as well. It's not just to fulfill your lifestyle need, whatever that happens to be. There's a lot of social content in shopping. And I would argue that dates back thousands upon thousands of years. It's not likely to change anytime soon. And there's an entertainment component of it, which is really important as well. But what we advise retailers when we talk to them is you need to pay attention to how people entertain themselves today. It's not that the entertainment is going away, it's that it's changed dramatically. So I always use this as this is my little entertainment kiosk, and we all have one of those, and we keep ourselves plenty busy with that. And getting over to something that Steve said. We need to, in our stores, use the same technologies that consumers use. That American retailers perfected in the last 40 years. That's going to change.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm going to initially put this next question to you, Miya. So Mark Thompson's asking in the chat, with such high numbers of shoppers now online, is this storing up a massive returns challenge?
Well, I think obviously we've seen returns become more and more of an issue, both from a point of view from a retailer's perspective, from impacting the bottom line, but also from an environmental perspective. And I think in that regard, I'm thinking immediately more of sort of the fashion sector there, in terms of textiles and processes involved in not just creating the clothes, but creating the textiles that we use for clothing, for fashion and apparel. I have always been on the side of the consumer on this front, and that is in regards to the fact that I don't think retailers do a great job of making it easy for consumers to know that they're buying the right thing for the right time for the first time. John might remember recently over in the UK, we have fast fashion retailer, online retailer called Pretty Little Thing. They've recently started booting even people on their VIP subscription-based delivery list off of the site. We won't fulfill your orders anymore because they've been labeled serial returners. Reading some of the stories, some of the very loyal customers have admitted that they're buying 3 sizes at once, just because size and fit doesn't run true across the entire range for Pretty Little Thing, as for many other retailers, fashion retailers. So, you know, 360-degree spin, augmented reality fitting, better product information management systems, digital asset management systems to be able to show color and texture better tagging. There are so many different things that retailers can do to make it easier for the customer to know that what they're looking for is right for them first time. And then we can start to look at penalizing consumers for having bought the wrong thing. And in that regard, I think we are seeing retailers look at charging for returns, but I would challenge any retailer right now that's charging for returns to actually say that their online buying journey actually negates the need for anybody to have doubt when they're buying. The final point is, it goes back to, though, we must try. I think what's been great about this conversation so far is we're taking a really multifaceted 360-degree view to this. Brian said up to about, I think, 84% of all sales are still fulfilled online in the US. It's about the same in the UK. It used to be about 90% pre-COVID. It's probably more around 85% now. And in that regard, there is also something to be said for incentivizing the consumer to come in and try the product on, touch it, feel it. Appointment systems, for example, through COVID, high touch, high value categories like home furnishings reported that customers were coming in better informed, higher purchase intent, and converting even bigger baskets. So taking a truly omni-channel approach to tackling returns is absolutely key, because I think last year in the US it was about 11.4% of all fashion and apparel clothing was returned. So it's a real problem, both on the balance sheet and an environmental perspective as well.
I mean, we've got, just to make it really quick, I mean, we've got some really recent data about returns specifically. And firstly, Miya, we've got the same issue of retailers trying to rank customers. Are you a good customer, a bad customer? Should I charge you? Should I minimize your window of return? Is yours 15 days instead of 30 days? People playing around in all different ways of that. But one of the things that really jumped out to us in some of our recent store research was around returns. And we asked both retailers and consumers the same thing. What do you do with a return? You know, as a retailer, what does a return look like to you? And the answer probably doesn't surprise you. We welcome online returns. We had to duct tape and put something together during the pandemic, because pre-pandemic, no one was really accepting online returns. It was seen as sort of a nice to have. Someday we'll get to that buy online, return in store, BOPUS, ROPUS, click and collect, whatever you want to call it. The pandemic made it table stakes. Everybody had to do it. But the happy accident for a lot of retailers was, well, this is great because now we've encouraged this relationship where we don't care if someone orders 5 online and keeps the one they like and brings 4 back in the store, because there's going to be an ancillary sale once they're in store, right? No, there's not. Consumers tell us we keep the one we want, we go to the store, we return the 4 that we didn't, and we get the hell out. We're not walking around the store, we're not shopping. And God forbid that I have an exchange. If I have an exchange, all I'm going to do is exchange the one thing that I want. I'm not going to look at anything else. I'm going to put blinders on and leave. So there's this really disparate view between what retailers think is happening and what shoppers tell us is reality. And that is the added cost of omni-channel has come back to haunt retailers. And those who are much more cognizant of that fact are in a better position to do something about it. What that something is remains to be seen. We've got a lot of work to do there. But something has to change, because this using your living room as a showroom is not working for anybody, whether they're selling, fashion or consumer electronics. It's just not working.
I'll just very quickly add that Steve's made me remind everybody that having a decent returns process, having a plan for those goods when they come back into your supply chain is absolutely key. A UK retailer really knocking out the park over here at the moment in terms of returns processing and feeding their strategy around the circular economy is Currys. So they're a home electronics retailer, and they currently have a workforce of about 4,000 or 5,000 people now that dedicated to restoring, repairing, repurposing goods. They've really sort of moved sideways into not just selling us goods, but helping us take care of them, helping us get a longer life out of them. And there is something to be said from a purpose-driven brand perspective for retailers to be seen to be actually doing something about this, not just turning a blind eye, as Steve rightly points out. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I see another interesting question. I just would like to open it up for anyone on the panel. So Mark Thompson's asking, I hear from both sides of the pond that leading retailers are shifting strategies away from a cost focus to a growth focus. Do you see that too? And what does that actually mean for retail execution?
Let me jump in on that one. There is definitely talk that that's the shift. I'm yet to fully see that. I think on both sides of the Atlantic, retailers have been complaining for a long time about their low return, their low operating margins. They're running on, in some cases in grocery, it's down at 2 or 3%. In fashion, it's sort of 5, 6, 7%. But given all the costs that have been built in, as we've just been discussing, margins are getting tighter and tighter. And yes, when in the last few years, the trend has been to try and cut as much cost out as possible. There is now talk of growth now but I think there's 2 things going on. One is partnerships, and one is new markets and new channels. In terms of partnerships, what you're seeing, as I talked about before, the growth of aggregators. So what you're seeing is some kind of this bigger online, or some bigger operators creating their own marketplaces. You're now seeing, I think Nordstrom's are now creating their own marketplace in the US. But going back to the example of Next, they create a platform, and increasingly what you're seeing is smaller brands focusing on product and going to the aggregators to do all of their back of house. Or do a lot of their kind of logistics, the last mile, etc. That's one way they see of growing their market share, but also at the same time reducing the costs they've got in their business. And then the other point on growth is, and my speciality is helping brands sort of go into new markets around the world. Increasingly now you're seeing back in that recognition of is extending your customer reach into new geographies and new markets, because particularly if you're building partnerships through wholesale and franchise, again, you're keeping your costs relatively low, you're keeping your risks relatively low, but you're getting a much bigger reach. And there is this flip flopping of whether wholesale is a good thing or a bad thing. You look at the likes of Nike announced 5 years ago they were going to get rid of all their wholesale. Now slowly but surely they're bringing it back in because they realise they're just not getting the doors and the eyeballs they were on that product. So yeah, I think that there is that move, but I should have said at the start with cost, partly because I think they've cut through the fat and they're now cutting into the bone in terms of cost management. So yeah, I don't know if anybody else has got a view on that.
Yeah, Brian, I see Brian's got his hand up. Sorry, let me go quickly first to him and then back to you, Miya.
You're right about growth, but it has to be sustainable growth. We did a study last year, and the number one agenda for retailers across all the spectrum that we asked about was sustainable growth. Now, what does that mean? It means that you actually it's accretive. It delivers bottom line value. John mentioned 3% for a grocer and 5 or 6% for a fashion retailer. That's the EBITDA line. And if in the United States anyway, at the end of the long day, if you have a really good day and you're a grocer, you might get to keep $0.015 for every dollar you put in a register. It's just a brutal business. So there's an eternal search to lower cost. And the problem with omnichannel is it's added cost. It's added a lot of cost. A grocer is a perfect example. They never had pick and pack routines before. The consumer served herself, and now the order has to be picked and it has to be delivered to the curbside or whatever. These are new costs. So retailers are looking to find other ways to cut costs because the one thing that they're not allowed to do, according to all of our research, is raise prices. Consumers are remarkably sensitive to prices, and they use their little kiosk, their mobile kiosk, to check prices all day long. So finding new costs to eliminate so that you can afford to do the things that consumers are demanding, that's really the name of the game. And that's what's driving automation in the stores, particularly in the non-selling functions.
Thank you. Miya, I think you wanted to add something.
Very quickly, I think it's been so comprehensive. John spoken so eloquently on marketplaces, adding accretive costs into from an omnichannel perspective. Absolutely. Net new cross-border, John mentioned as well, but net new. We talk about the added cost of omnichannel, but there's also added opportunity. I think that's cross-border and marketplaces, as evidenced by John's answer, but also retail media networks, loyalty, monetizing all that customer data that we share from a digital perspective. All those digital footprints we leave, I think, is certainly an area I see being mirrored on both sides of the pond as somewhere that retailers are really looking to kind of add net new growth.
So in the final few minutes before we close, obviously AI is one of those burning platforms that everyone I know is talking about. They're concerned about how much AI is the right amount. Does it supplement the human experience in a retail setting? Does it replace it? Or should we be afraid of the retail experience becoming so automated that there's no humanity left? Be interesting to just do a really quick poll of each of you on your perspectives on whether AI is the disruptor that people are currently, I think, perceiving it to be. And is it a force for good, or will it undermine the future of retail in the US and the UK? So why don't I ask each of you in turn, based on the order that you're on my screen, if I may. So let's start with John Scott, please. You're on.
So you've gone to the person who probably knows the least amount of AI compared to everybody else on it. Look, I think there is a hell of a lot to talk about it, and you go to any conference now, it fills probably 70% of the air. As always with these, with sort of new technologies, it can be whatever you want it to be. But the reality is, what I think a lot of retailers are trying to do is narrow the user case to start with, because otherwise, I mean, it can solve every problem, but half the time it doesn't. you don't need it to. So I think there's already been a lot of people are going, oh, well, we already do that. Well, we already do that. A lot of machine learning's been there already. So look, I think you can't ignore it, and clearly you have to look at where it is coming. But the interesting thing, I think what it is doing is a lot of retailers who are looking to invest in new systems are holding back and going, well, we don't know what next year, a year after, 3 years looks like. So why would I invest heavily in new systems and processes now? So I think it almost is creating a bit of a hiatus while people go, well, which way is this going to go?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, John. Briefly, Steve, your views on where it's going to take us.
The best quote I've heard about AI so far comes from a consultant that's working with the Department of Defense here in the United States, who said AI is going to make every single thing in life better, right up until the point where it doesn't. But the short answer as it relates to retail, I'm not concerned about it. I'm really not, because retail is not a fast-moving industry. We've had 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, however you want to look at it, version of how retailers implement technology. Now, the technologists on the other side selling into retail, their message is 100%, this is assistive. We're going to help people who decide what gets sold, how it gets priced, where it gets sold. We're going to help them make decisions smarter and better. And that is absolutely dominating the airwaves. The point you made about the consumer experience, though, I will say this, I'll leave you this one last thing. In our latest consumer survey, the #1 frustration among consumers, I cannot get to a person when I need to. Leap years above everything else. So if retailers think that they're just going to automate the entire customer experience, that would be ill-advised in our opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. Brian, you're next. What's your thought?
Well, there are so many things to talk about. We could probably do our own webinar on AI, but it all depends on what you're talking about. I'm going to make a confession and say that I'm old enough to remember when COBOL was going to eliminate programmers. Ha ha ha. AI, depending on which way you're talking about it, let's just talk about what we characterize internally as good old-fashioned AI. And that's the ability of using an analytical engine to go through unstructured data, for example, clicks from email, paths to purchase information from the digital space, social sentiment, and those kinds of things to improve your ability to forecast. And retailers are, in fact, chasing that right now. Because in the past, forecasting was based on transactional data that you typically gathered from your last selling season. Now retailers want to be able to respond very quickly to sudden changes in demand, and AI is a big assist because it can actually look at huge pools of unstructured data and find statistical similarities. That's really important, and that's really good. There are a couple of other areas where we're seeing some activity, and some of it's kind of, fairy dust at this point. But one of them is basically a new UI, the ability to ask the system a question in plain language and get an answer. So you can do really sophisticated analyses of data without any data science expertise at all. Now that's coming out to market, and retailers are starting to use those in some ways. The third is the fairy dust thing, which is basically the whole issue of content creation. And it has a future. And when you think about, for example, if you're talking to a big CPG brand like Kellogg or General Mills, they want to sell the same things in different retailer outlets, but they don't want the messaging to look the same. Yeah. The retailers one said, no, I want it to look this way for my clientele, and the other one is saying something else. So content creation based on those kind of localization schemes using AI, that's viable. It's real.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, Miya, you get the last word.
Oh my goodness. Agreeing with all that's been said already, we've been using artificial intelligence in retail supply chains for forecasting and modeling for nigh on 30 plus years now. I think the difference with generative AI is we're taking on a lot more unstructured data, multiple data sources, feeding them into large learning models. So I'm seeing AI systems using both using machine learning, computer vision, and natural language processing allow retailers to kind of operate at a scale that is greater than the sum of their parts. I'm seeing it in 4 buckets: marketing, merchandising, customer service, and supply chain, as we've mentioned. And bring it back to sort of what Steve made me think of. The best quote I've heard so far is that right now I'm not worried. I would agree with you there, Steve. I think I'm hearing people that are at the coalface saying that AI is not going to come for their jobs. People that know how to use AI is going to come for their jobs. So, time saving capabilities, the abilities of pattern matching, to be able to spot missing elements on a PDP page, to be able to dynamically superimpose product images on models. All of those things are real already. Aggregating an entire customer review in order for the store associate to be able to answer a question on the fly for a customer asking a specific characteristic of a product. These are all already there. I just think retailers have to at least learn to work out what's going to be useful to them, to John's point, and it will pay to actually start doing that now.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, but I'd just like to extend my sincere thanks to Miya, to Steve, Brian, John, and it's been a pleasure to share this with you and learn quite a lot myself about the different aspects of US and UK and what we might learn from each other. So thanks to all of you who have signed up and joined us today. We're all reachable via the IORMA website. Don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any other questions that we weren't able to get to today. And just from me, thank you very much for joining, and hope to see you again on a next IORMA event. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Allyson. A splendid event and some really insightful comments from all of the panelists. I'd like to thank you on behalf of IORMA, all of you, for your contributions to this event today. It's a shame that we have run out of time, but I think you packed an awful lot into the 60 minutes we were there together. So I'm now going to bring this event to a close and just ask people to log off and just say thank you once again.